everybody, and welcome to another one of our K-SIG. We are thrilled to have today two of our CTSI-CN partners, Sharon Ella and Lynn Offermann, who are going to talk to us today about team science. And at a certain point at the end of their presentation today, we are also going to have a Zoom connectivity with a person that at least one of you in the room knows about, and that is Patrick Hanley, who runs a incredibly tight team upon which many, many things depend. And he's going to talk to us for a few minutes. Unfortunately, he's at a meeting, so he can't physically be here, but through the magic of the cloud, we will have him connect with us to reflect a little bit on what team science is like from the ground up. So without further ado, thank you.
Good to see you today. Thank you for the invitation. We did something similar to this for the CTSA leads. This was back in July. And we have kind of tailored some of what we would like to cover today based on Allison's kind of comments of what she thought would be helpful. So we will do that. Just a brief overview of kind of what we're hoping to kind of cover, and hope that, you know, we're a small group, so if you have comments or things that you'd like to go in a different direction, let us know. So we'd like to kind of give you a brief overview of what's called the science of team science, what that is, the different trends in terms of how we're using teams in scientific research, what kinds of opportunities and challenges we see, and actually later on we'll be presenting some information that we've gotten from focus groups that we've run from other team science awards from last year, talking about some of the opportunities, what the opportunities might be, and then hopefully, I know you've got the activity, but basically asking you to kind of think about your own teams and challenges, and then we'll try to discuss those as well and try to apply some of what we're sharing with your particular teams as we go forward. So I guess to start, okay, what is a team? Well, obviously it takes two to tango, and so you have to have at least two or more people, but that's not enough. You need to have a clear boundary and identity, so you know who's in the team and who's not in the team. Although that's true with just any kind of group as well. Usually you define that as individuals who are bounded, who have some sense of who's part of us and who's not part of us. Bless you. You have a common identity. You know, we are the team that does something or other, or we have a different uniform, but we know who we are and we identify with that particular group. And that there's some kind of shared goal. Why do we exist? There's something that we're supposed to do, something we're supposed to accomplish, something that's supposed to happen as a result of being in this collective, and that we're all responsible for that. We share the responsibility for that outcome. But the real kicker that differentiates just a group of Boy Scouts or a group of other things from a team, what we would call a team, is this notion of interdependence. And that is that you really need to connect with other people and work collectively. One of the authors that I like talks about it as to be a team, it has to be, every person has to feel that they would do better, or they don't have an option, they need to be in that team in order to be successful. They can't be successful without these other people making that contribution. And so it is interdependent. You have to depend on other people. It's not just enough to work on your own. You have to have that connection. It's not just nice to have these people there, but you need them. You will not be successful in what you want to do without them. And that really kind of gets to the idea why in the science field and in medicine, we find that basically teamwork is now the way things get done. The problems that you grapple with are big problems. They're not solved by one discipline or one person. They tend to be large enough that we have to have this kind of collaborative effort to be successful. The problems are big. They cross over geographic boundaries. They cross over disciplinary boundaries. And so it's really important that we find ways to work together. And so these new kinds of teams in science tend to again, be cross-disciplines, cross-geography, and across organizations. I mean, our CTSA is a good example of that. You've got GW and children. There's certain differences in the way our organizations are structured, and we have to find ways to manage that. But the reason we do it is we're more successful that way. And the data is pretty clear. We didn't torture you with the whole article, but we can send it if you want. But it goes into a lot of detail suggesting that how much more successful these scientific research teams can be when they are teams, successful teams, and when they are interdisciplinary, when they collaborate with other people, they expand different organizations, different cultures, different boundaries. So we've done a lot of research looking at the publication rates of what comes out of these teams. We've looked at how much that information is disseminated and how widely it's disseminated. And the data is pretty clear that people do better in terms of wide distribution and dissemination and impact in the real world when you have these kinds of interdisciplinary teams, these multi-organization teams. The citation counts are higher, the publication rates are higher. So there's a lot of good reasons why we think that these teams are very important. And the other one is kind of interesting that actually mixed gender teams also tend to do better and actually have a higher hit rate in terms of grant funding. And again, we think that's because these teams have more resources. You have people who bring different perspectives, they bring different ideas. And then if you just think about it, I'm an organizational psychologist. If I publish with other organizational psychologists, or even someone in management, we tend to publish in the same journals. And so yes, we may be known in those journals, but I've worked at other times with like computer scientists. And if you have that in the team, they're publishing stuff in the computer science literature. So now the work that I'm doing is getting cited not just in my own literature, but in another literature. And then those students are building on that, and my students are building on that. And so you're building a much wider net when you bring in these people who have different perspectives. And so the citation counts go up, the impact goes up, because it's being implemented or translated into these different kinds of fields. And so you tend to find, again, by any kind of metric that we're using, which is usually publications, citations, and in terms of impact on the field, it's higher when we see these kinds of teams. That's the good news. The less good news is that, and probably you've all experienced, sometimes teams don't meet their optimal productivity. We know that when we compose these teams, the potential should be really high because we have all these great resources and we have these opportunities, but oftentimes the success rate is a little disappointing. It's not doing what we expected it to do. And because these folks are not necessarily trained in teamwork and not necessarily having some problems. And we're going to, again, share later on some of the issues from the focus group that we found seem to be common in some of the collaborative efforts that have come under the CTSI. So what is this thing we call the science of team science? I hope that I can mention that in fact, we benefit by these kinds of teams. And so there's a big literature in my field, certainly in organizational psychology and in management, about team science. The science of team science is taking what we know from these other kinds of domains and applying it to scientific research teams. So it's really a kind of specialty area of looking at particularly what research teams need, what teams in various areas of science and medicine need to be successful. So where did that come from? Well, it started actually out of NIH because back in 2006, they started realizing that they're funding a lot of research and not all of these teams were very successful. That is, they did not meet the aims that were stated in their proposals. And that's wastes the government money, and it doesn't help practice either. So they started to kind of investigate, okay, what is it about scientific research teams? What about the people who are in them, how we compose them, how they work together, that's inhibiting them from meeting the aims that they've set out for themselves. And so actually the National Academy of Sciences had commissioned a whole group of individuals to then go through the literature and go through and look at teams, and actually then sponsoring or encouraging CTSIs like ours to start putting this kind of science of team science into proposals and into our thinking about how we want to do translational research. How can we embed that? How can we make that work? And so that really was the kind of push of saying, we want to keep, NIH, we want to keep funding this research, but we want it to be successful. And realizing that people, particularly in the sciences, are not necessarily trained well in terms of how to work collaboratively, both in their own teams, but also across organizations, and again, virtually. And so one of the issues you'll see that Sharon will be talking about will be dealing with this idea of how do you make a team when not everybody is physically in the same place at the same time. And so those are the kinds of challenges that we face. And so with that, I think I'm going to turn over to Sharon, who's going to walk you through kind of a model.
Yeah, very good. Welcome, everyone. I'm Sharon Ella. I'm in the management department over at the GW Business School, and so glad to be here. So I want to pick up on what Lynn said, right, because maybe get rid of that glare for just a moment, because she articulated all these benefits, right, that kind of really pay off when we work in teams and multidisciplinary teams. But the science of team science really starts from the assumption that you're only going to get those benefits by being very purposeful about how you work in teams. So let me just give you a quick example. So here am I, I'm an individual researcher, right, working on a particular project, and it's just me. So all of my effort, all I have to worry about is myself, right, and all my effort goes into doing that task. All of a sudden, I go out and I'm going to do a project with Lynn, and Lynn and I have done many projects together. Automatically, some of the effort and some of the attention that I was giving to the project task now gets diverted, because all of a sudden, I have to coordinate with Lynn. Maybe we have to work on forming a positive relationship. You know, we've got to figure out how we're going to do handoffs. The point I'm trying to make is that automatically, as soon as you engage in a collaboration, even with just one other person, some of the energy that goes towards doing the task is lost and it gets diverted to doing collaborative work. And you've got to figure out how to collaborate. So the science of team science, and that's automatically going to divert some energy and attention. So if you're not purposeful about that and how you offset that with making the collaboration work so you can still get the benefits, you're just going to incur all the downsides to collaborative work, if that makes sense, right? So the science of team science is really about thinking very purposefully about how we collaborate together. It's focused on what I call the teamwork aspects of collaborative work. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today applies regardless of what the particular project is, right? Yeah, as the scientist, you've got to figure out the actual task itself. That's important. But this is more about how you work together. And so I just wanted to kind of frame that, all right? So let's go ahead. What I want to describe to you is what I call a model of team effectiveness. It's kind of a summary of a lot of the research in this area. And it's going to look pretty simple, but there's a lot behind it. There's a lot of research that goes behind it in each of these areas. But it's a good way to give you a sense of the scope of the field and summarize. What it tries to do is summarize what are some of the key aspects with regard to collaborative work, with teamwork, that really enable teams to be effective. And let me tell you kind of one key takeaway, and that is that when it comes to teamwork success, there is not one magic bullet. We wish there was, right? Really what the research suggests is that there's kind of, there's a combination of key enabling factors that we need to pay attention to. And I just want to give you a sense of what those are, all right? So that's a little preface to the model. So let me step you through the model, starting at the end. Our ultimate goal is team effectiveness, right? What's really important from a science of team science perspective is that team effectiveness does not just mean getting the task output that you want. What it also means is that, looks like I'm going to have to put the whole model up to get the last slide that I want. Sorry, guys. So what it also means is that how people feel as a result of that experience. Because if we want teamwork to perpetuate, it's no use getting the task done. At the end of it, everyone wants to kill themselves, and it's like, I would never do that again. And I'm sure some of you have had those experiences, right? So what's really important when we think of team science is getting to an effective task output, whatever the project might be, that also leaves people with a really positive sense of the experience so that they will engage in it again. That's really critical, right? So what the model suggests is that in order to get team effectiveness, what's going to drive that is how team members interact together. We call that broadly team dynamics. And so in this area, we're concerned about things such as, sorry guys, my animation is not great here, such as how we communicate, how we coordinate our work, right? How we cooperate, how we monitor what the team is doing, how we manage conflict in the team, do we build trust, are members accountable? These are just a sample of team dynamics that we kind of care about in the realm of science of team science. And there's research done on each of these, what's the best way to handle conflict and so forth, right? But what's ultimately going to shape those team dynamics are what we call team inputs, and I'm sure my animation is going to go crazy again, so let me just... And there are two sets of team inputs we care about. And so when we say team inputs, what we mean are factors that we need to think about up front, and you're going to have the opportunity in a moment. Yeah, I'm going to move through quickly so we get there to look at those. I'm going to give a quick overview. But these are key enabling factors that shape how team members work together. And the basis of this model says that if we really want our teams to be effective, this is where we need to spend our time. Up front when the team is forming, giving really careful thought to the internal design of the team, but also, do we have the support we need outside of the team, all right? And so, and I'll give you a flavor, you'll get a sense of this in just a moment. In fact, let me go ahead and have you, oh, that's not quite the one I want. So I'm going to quickly talk a little bit, very briefly, to each of these team inputs, and then I'm going to ask you to do an activity that will help you think about it a little bit more. Everyone's looking very worried. It's going to be a very simple activity. They're like, no, I'm not trying to do an activity on Tuesday at lunch. That's okay. I promise it will be painless. Very quickly then, and then I'll have you jump into the activity, right? When we think about the internal design of the team, things we need to care about are whether we have a clear and compelling goal that really is intrinsically motivating to team members, and are all team members aligned around that goal. Often in teams, we've got members whose interests are kind of at odds with the overall goal of the team, right? So we want to pay really careful attention to that. We want to think about how we organize the work in terms of the interdependency in the team, right? If we really want to leverage the benefits of having different expertise and backgrounds and disciplines, that's not going to be leveraged if everyone just goes and works on their own and then we pull it together at the end. So we want to think about how much coordination and integration do we need, and if we need that in order to get the task done effectively, don't assume it's going to happen. We've got to come up with procedures that makes that sharing of ideas happen. It doesn't happen by default. Then we need to think about how team members are rewarded. Is it as a team or based on individual effort? We need to think really carefully about how the team is composed, who's on the team, how many people, the type of personalities, do they have the time that's needed to devote to the team, and the mix of people on the team, right? So there's a whole science around how you compose your team. And then finally, we need to think also very carefully about the norms and operating procedures. How are we going to communicate? What are some of the behaviors that are expected about team members? These types of things drive accountability behaviors, they drive cooperation and so forth. And then extremely important, we need to think about what types of support does the team need from outside, whether it's funding, whether it's space to work, other types of resources, does the team need to be successful? And what this model suggests is if you spend a lot of time up front planning for those things and putting the team together in the right way with the right level of support, then this is not going to completely eliminate having problems later on, but it's going to drastically reduce the potential for problems to occur later down the line, all right? So maybe just to have you thinking a little bit about this in the context of your own teams, how many of you have worked in teams? Any teams at all? Yeah, I know you all have. It's almost inescapable in today's world, right, not to work in teams. What I'd like to ask you to do is, on the assessment that I handed out, you have these four internal design areas listed and the fifth one here. And what you have is statement. So for example, let's take number 1, a shared goal. For teams that are expected in this area, you see 3 bullets that would describe how things operate in that team. I'd like you to take maybe just 5 minutes to quickly scan through this assessment, thinking about a team or a science team in which you currently work or have worked in the past. It's really important to anchor this with one particular team. Maybe think about a team that's either been particularly good or particularly horrific. It's usually easier to think about the latter, by the way, all right? And all I want you to do is do a quick assessment, go through the checklist, and do a quick assessment. In which of these areas do you see, like, issues with that particular team? Maybe you had, in team composition, team members that just did not get along, so they were the wrong people, for example, right? So, and use the kind of bulleted statements to guide you. To what extent do you agree with these statements for the team that you're thinking about, right? And then at the end, I'll just ask maybe a few volunteers to just share a few of their observations. Does that make sense? All right. Let you do that. Let's take about 5 minutes to do that. Thanks so much. And if you have questions, let us know. Lynn and I are happy to come around and chat. And if one area really stands out to you as being particularly problematic, go ahead and make a quick note of that. I'd love to hear about that as you read through these statements. Think, wow, this is an area that's a real problem in this team. I'd love to hear about it. Let's maybe take another minute. Would that work for everyone? I don't want to overdo it. We've had enough time. Let's take another minute and then we'll just maybe hear some ideas that people have. All right, some of you may not have gotten through it completely, but I'd be interested, were there any areas that really stood out as, wow, being kind of problematic or particularly effective in any of the teams in which you've worked? I see nodding heads. Do you mind sharing?
Sure. I was thinking about a team that I worked on that maybe wasn't as effective.
Yes.
As it hoped to be. And the thing that I circled as I was reading through was the size of the team. The team that I was thinking about was like a large multi-site.
How large was the team?
Gosh, probably like 20.
Yeah.
And so we would have these very well-intentioned phone calls, maybe quarterly, but only a few voices would ever speak. And then there were a lot of, I also said who was on the team, it was a lot of more like PI type people and not very many administrators.
Right.
And so even things like who's gonna take the meeting minutes, who's gonna help set up the next call, it would just be like, nobody wanted to do that.
Which actually gets us into norms and operating
Yeah.
procedures, right? So, can I ask you, because I have to smile, Lynn was smiling too, the size of these science teams is an area that Lynn and I just, is out of control, we see being out of control. And if you had to do it again, clearly not, what would you do, if you were in charge of that team, what would you do? Would you reduce the size, would you do something else?
Well, I think there were so many disparate interests, and it wasn't a very clear, it wasn't a very narrow goal. So I think maybe subcommittees could have helped, like people with different interests.
Yes, so now we're getting into the shit, you're hitting
Yeah.
all my bullets. Yeah. So,
some smaller groups within that community.
The thing is, people say to me, but we need all these people, we need the expertise, and I say, fine, but proceed at your peril, right? So what we need to do, the point of this is we need to give upfront thought. Team science tells us that that's problematic, such large teams, so maybe we have subgroups, maybe we have a core, an extended team, but what we can't do is ignore it, right? So that's why this upfront thinking. Wonderful, thanks so much, and and that gets us into, if we're gonna have subgroups, then how are we gonna coordinate, right? We've got to think through this stuff. Thanks so much for kicking us off. Let's hear maybe one or two other ideas. What other areas stood out to you as, like, problematic or particularly effective in some of your past teams? Other thoughts?
I found that shared goal or purpose important, and I've been involved with, in the bad experiences, I'm asked to be part of a team rather than I was, part of the inception of the idea of the goal.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of thrown in, and I'm not really clear who's really that interested, and it becomes very clear not everyone is.
And what happens then?
How
does that manifest itself in the team
when
dynamic?
things go wrong, there's a lot of strain and anxiety, and we can't work together to solve the problem. So it was felt like, okay, this person's not understanding, they don't care, and this other person not holding up their part. It's very different from being actually forming my own team. So then it's very clear, that I would like everyone to understand as joining a team, what is the purpose, what role they're going to play, and so everyone gets a chance to speak and give their input. Everyone values, others' expertise and what they bring to the team, and we work through things a lot better.
And so you've hit a number of these inputs here. The shared goal, which, if people don't think their interests are being represented by the team, you're not going to get cooperation. They're not going to be accountable. People are going to just be off doing their own thing, right? You also said that can also, you try to make roles and responsibilities clear. That's part of operating procedures, right? So people know exactly who's doing what and so forth. So you've hit a number of those bullets. So let me share with you then, just in the interest of time, and thanks to those of you who have shared, when you really start dissecting your past team experiences, it's hard to argue with some of these team inputs, right? The problem is we don't spend enough time up front paying attention to them. And a lot of the interventions that Lynn and I do with teams is to have them stop up front to go through a very deliberate process of planning for these things, all right? Let me share with you some of the results from, Lynn mentioned that we've done some focus groups with Team Science Award teams from last year. We sat down with them and we said kind of what worked well, what didn't work so well. Amazingly, a lot of the themes that you've talked about came up. I won't go through all of them, but certainly in terms of what really inhibited team effectiveness, team composition is always a big theme, right? have we spent enough time really thinking about, do we have the right people? Do the people we have even have sufficient time to contribute, right? What are the characteristics of people we need to? Certainly incompatible personalities came up. A lot of things relate to norms and operating procedures, which came up in our discussions. Having unclear roles and responsibilities, not thinking through how we're going to coordinate and work as a multidisciplinary team and how we're going to communicate, right? None of you mentioned this, which really surprised me, which is organizational support. A huge, huge barrier to effective teamwork that came out of our focus groups. Inadequate funding, inadequate time, inadequate administrative support, and ineffective procedures. A lot of which often the team doesn't have total control over, unfortunately, but you still got to think through those things and how they're going to impact the team. And also,
let me
absolutely.
So I think everybody in this room in particular deals with inadequate funding, inadequate time, and inadequate administrative support in one way or the other, whether they're funded junior investigators or more senior or whatever. And that is clearly something that you have no control over. So if the team judges that there's inadequate funding, inadequate time, and inadequate administrative support, should they cut down on what it is that they hope to accomplish? Should they, quote, just say no? What approach should be taken?
Well, we've done a couple of things. So one thing, yes, you could cut back and try to scale the project down to what you can support. What we found, and actually people were talking about how they dealt with this, I think goes to your kind of point, is basically they engaged people on the team who were committed regardless of how much money they were going to have to do it. And so they accomplished what they needed to because they really bought into it. They were there because they wanted to be there. And they were willing to exert the time, even if it meant that, theoretically, that they were putting in much more than their percentage of effort would have suggested that they were putting in. And that's where that kind of shared goal and the commitment to the project, to the particular science case that they're working at, I think, bought them a lot of the success that they had. But they did that at some personal cost in terms of their own time, and that certainly came out in the groups that we talked about. That is something that we have probably the least control over.
So I would just echo that and say, so when I teach my students about teamwork, and we spend a whole semester talking about this stuff, right, that often comes up. But some of these things I have no control over. And I say, yeah, but we know it's going to impact how the team works. So you still own thinking through it and thinking what's the best approach for dealing with it, and whether it's making sure you have members who are going to proceed regardless of that. It could be in some cases reaching out beyond the boundaries of the team to try and get the support you need, but we all know that's not always going to work. What it means is paying attention to it, and it could mean making the decision that maybe this is not the right time to do this. So it could mean a number of different things. What's important is that you're thinking through it as a team and what the implications are. Does that make sense?
You make the choices.
Yeah, there's not always a silver bullet, right, on some of this stuff. But I always say ignore it at your peril. So if you know it's critical for the success of the team, then you have to decide what are the trade-offs? Do we move ahead? Can we influence things? And so forth. Not the magic answer, but yeah. On the enabling side, a lot of the opposite to what we saw as the key packages. Often what we found was really key is really having these motivated team members, right, with a really clear goal. Look at all the team composition issues here. This reliable team members who have the time to commit is a huge one, and you got to screen for that up front. A lot of times thinking about norms and operating procedures, what I did want to just mention here, where do I have it? Norms and procedures for remote work. What we're finding, and this happens to be my particular research area of focus, is how you collaborate when you don't have a lot of face-to-face contact and you're using technology primarily. And what we found was that there were some teams that took a lot of time up front thinking through how they were going to deal with working at a distance and coming up with some very effective virtual communication norms. And others just assume that a team is a team, that's no problem. And they really struggled because working when you have remote members is not the same as working face-to-face. And you really do have, there are some things that can help you be effective in that mode, but you need to be aware of them, you need to think through them. Any questions? We just want to share with you, I don't think any of this would be surprising to you guys, right? This is what the teams are facing.
And one thing to what Sharon said is that sometimes people underestimate it. I mean, you expect, okay, you're gonna have, you'll have some people here at Children's, and some people are in Bolivia, looking at the Zika, and they're collecting data in the field. You expect that, and maybe you can plan for it. But what we're finding is you have issues with virtuality, even for all people who are here in DC, because mostly we're communicating over these little boxes, and so you still have a lot of the miscommunications or other potential issues, and often people have not thought through that element. They just assume, okay, well, we're all here, so we don't have to really deal with that. We're concerned with how the field people connect to us, because we expect that and we plan for that.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And then the other piece is just that, I mean, for a lot of these teams, what they had to do is then, if they didn't do it in the sequence that Sharon just described, is, okay, now we're in a situation, how do we deal with this? We've still made a commitment to this project. How do we go back essentially to square one and now debrief and try to change processes? And a number of these teams, the ones who were more successful, had to go back and do that. And so some of them actually ended up building in more face-to-face communication. One of the team leaders said, I have to go out into the field once every 3 months. I didn't plan for that, but I have to have that kind of contact with the field staff. It just wasn't working completely virtually. But then, just as Sharon said, I mean, so you can renegotiate those processes, or in your case, you realize we've got this, this is too many people to have on the call. I can't keep 20 heads, remotely clear as to who's talking to that. Maybe, again, we have these subgroups, or they focus on this, or they focus on that, and we have, so with larger teams where you break it into a core team, maybe the decision-making team that then delegates these different things and brings it back. But it's not something that's once and done. I mean, that basically, okay, you start having problems, and then you tank this, okay. That's the time to kind of go back and rethink that, restructure it. Are the right people on the team who are committed to this project? Do we have to break out? Is it too big? And teams tended not to do that.
Right, but a couple of the teams, they did that very conscious, let's pause, let's reset. So this is a good segue into the next slide. I just wanted to note that as a result of all those upfront input challenges, the teams talked about issues or successes with how they coordinated, communicated, managed conflict. Accountability of team members was a huge, big one, where, people basically don't say what they meet their commitments to the team, right? And monitoring the performance of the team and giving feedback. So that definitely bled into the dynamics of those teams that ultimately influenced how effective they were. But building on what Lynn has said, I didn't know I had animation on this, I'm just going to put it all up, sorry guys. What I want to do is emphasize then, what this model of team effectiveness allows us to do is to think about interventions that might be important as we begin to work with teams and ongoing. And Lynn has mentioned them, let me formalize that. What we recommend and definitely work to do with teams with which we work is to have pre-launch planning, right? So you take your checklist of team inputs and you literally think about, who should be on this team, how should we work together, and so forth. How do I articulate the purpose, and so forth, right? And then teams should have what we call a structured team launch process, where all the team, and I do mean all of the team, come together. Sometimes that might have to be with remote members virtually, maybe not face-to-face. And we talk about how we want to work together as a team. We talk about our norms and operating procedures and so forth. And we come to agreement. We kind of develop this contract as a team. And that's a really important intervention for teams to do up front. During that team launch, what you typically try to do is create what we call a team charter, which is basically our agreement of what's the goal of this project, who's going to do what, how are we going to work together, what are our norms, and so forth, right? And there are templates for doing that, team charter templates. And then as the team works together, these are critical interventions up front to make sure that the team is launched in an appropriate way. And then as the team works together, I call it loosely team coaching, but there needs to be a function in the team where people are kind of monitoring how things are going, what do we need to tweak, do certain people need feedback on what's going on. Probably going to be the team leader that does that. And also what we call structured team debriefs. Not we call, but what's commonly referred to as team debriefs, which is a structured process of taking some time to say what's working, what's not working. What do we need to change about how we're working together? What do we need to do differently? And again, doing that in a way that's going to help the team kind of realign or reset as it moves forward towards its deadline. All right? So what I've tried to do is kind of give you a really high-level view of what we think about when we think about the science of team science. All right? What are the activities involved in that? What are some of the factors that contribute to team success? Let me finish here. Lynn mentioned the National Cancer Institute. There is a Science of Team Science Toolkit, and the link is here, and I'm happy to share these slides so you can have the link electronically. And basically, this is kind of a collection of information and resources related to team science, right, that has come from professionals from many different disciplines. So I wanted to make you aware of that. That is out there. To kind of take a look at as you proceed. I think that was it, right? So I would say thank you. Obviously, in the time available, very high-level overview. I hope that kind of gives you a sense of what we mean by the science of team science. And again, I want to stress that it's kind of separate to whatever particular task the team is doing. These are general principles that apply across all teams, all right? So thanks for your attention. I'm going to hand over to whoever's facilitating the next phase of this. I know that we